Trance denotes any state of awareness or consciousness other than normal waking consciousness. Trance states may occur involuntarily and unbidden. The term trance may be associated with hypnosis, meditation, magic, flow, and prayer. It may also be related to the earlier generic term, altered states of consciousness, which is no longer used in consciousness studies discourse. Etymology. Trance in its modern meaning comes from an earlier meaning of a dazed, half-conscious or insensible condition or state of fear, via the Old French trans, fear of evil, from the Latin transire, to cross, pass over. This definition is now obsolete. Working models. Weir, in his 1995 book, Trance: From Magic to Technology, defines a simple trance as a state of mind being caused by cognitive loops where a cognitive object repeats long enough to result in various sets of disabled cognitive functions. Weir represents all trances as taking place on a dissociated trance plane where at least some cognitive functions such as volition are disabled, as is seen in what is typically termed a hypnotic trance. With this definition, meditation, hypnosis, addictions and charisma are seen as being trance states. In Weir's 2007 book The Way of Trance, he elaborates on these forms, adds ecstasy as an additional form and discusses the ethical implications of his model, including magic and government use, which he terms trance abuse. John Horgan in Rational Mysticism explores the neurological mechanisms and psychological implications of trances and other mystical manifestations. Horgan incorporates literature and case studies from a number of disciplines in this work: chemistry, physics, psychology, radiology and theology. Working definitions. The following are some examples of trance states. Enchantment. A psychological state induced by a magical incantation. A state of mind in which consciousness is fragile and voluntary action is poor or missing. A state resembling deep sleep. Capture. Attract. Caused to be enamored. She captured all the men's hearts, in the sense of entranced. A condition of apparent sleep or unconsciousness, with marked physiological characteristics, in which the body of the subject is thought by certain people to be liable to possession. An out-of-body experience in which one feels they have passed out of the body into another state of being, a rapture, an ecstasy. In a general way, the entranced conditions thus defined are divided into varying degrees of a negative, unconscious state, and into progressive gradations of a positive, conscious, illumining condition, a state of hyper or enhanced suggestibility, an induced or spontaneous sleep-like condition of an altered state of consciousness, which is thought by certain people to permit the subject's physical body to be utilized by disembodied spirits or entities as a means of expression. An altered state of awareness induced via hypnosis in which unconscious or dissociated responses to suggestion are enhanced in quality and increased in degree. A state induced by the use of hypnosis. The person accepts the suggestions of the hypnotist. A state of consciousness characterized by extreme dissociation, often to the point of appearing unconscious. Trance conditions include all the different states of mind, emotions, moods and daydreams that human beings experience. All activities which engage a human involve the filtering of information coming into sense modalities, and this influences brain functioning and consciousness. Therefore, trance may be understood as a way for the mind to change the way it filters information in order to provide more efficient use of the mind's resources. Trance states may also be accessed or induced by various modalities and is a way of accessing the unconscious mind for the purposes of relaxation, healing, intuition and inspiration. There is an extensive documented history of trance as evidenced by the case studies of anthropologists and ethnologists and associated and derivative disciplines. Hence, trance may be perceived as endemic to the human condition and a human universal. Principles of trance are being explored and documented as are methods of trance induction. Benefits of trance states are being explored by medical and scientific inquiry. Many traditions and rituals employ trance. Trance also has a function in religion and mystical experience. Castillo states that trance phenomena result from the behavior of intense focusing of attention, which is the key psychological mechanism of trance induction. Adaptive responses, including institutionalized forms of trance, are tuned into neural networks in the brain and depend to a large extent on the characteristics of culture. Culture-specific organizations exist in the structure of individual neurons and in the organizational formation of neural networks. Hoffman states that trance is still conventionally defined as a state of reduced consciousness, or a somnolent state. However, the more recent anthropological definition, linking it to altered states of consciousness, is becoming increasingly accepted. Hoffman asserts that the trance state should be discussed in the plural, because there is more than one altered state of consciousness significantly different from everyday consciousness. Origins and history. Temple of Epidaurus. Healing sleep. According to Hoffman, pilgrims visited the temple of Epidaurus, an Asclepieion, in Greece for healing sleep. Seekers of healing would make pilgrimage and be received by a priest who would welcome and bless them. This temple housed an ancient religious ritual promoting dreams in the seeker that endeavored to promote healing and the solutions to problems, as did the oracles. This temple was built in honor of Asclepios, the Greek god of medicine. The Greek treatment was referred to as incubation, and focused on prayers to Asclepios for healing. The Asclepieion at Epidaurus is both extensive and well preserved, and is traditionally regarded as the birthplace of Asclepius. The oracle at Delphi was also famous for trances in the ancient Greek world. Priestesses there would make predictions about the future in exchange for gold. Oral lore and storytelling. Stories of the saints in the Middle Ages. Myths, parables, fairy tales. Oral lore and storytelling from different cultures are themselves potentially inducers of trance. Often literary devices such as repetition are employed, which is evident in many forms of trance induction. Milton Erickson used stories to induce trance, as do many NLP practitioners. Military. From at least the 16th century it was held that march music may induce soldiers marching in unison into trance states where, according to apologists, they bond together as a unit engendered by the rigors of training, the ties of comradeship and the chain of command. This had the effect of making the soldiers become automated, an effect which was widely evident in the 16th, 17th and 18th century due to the increasing prevalence of firearms employed in warcraft. Military instruments, especially the snare drum and other drums, were used to entourage a monotonous ostinato at the pace of march and heartbeat. High-pitched fifes, flutes and bagpipes were used for their piercing effect to play the melody. This would assist the morale and solidarity of soldiers as they marched to battle. Joseph Jordania recently proposed a term, battle trance, for this mental state, when combatants do not feel fear and pain, and when they lose their individual identity and acquire a collective identity. The Norse berserkers induced a trance-like state before battle, called berserkergang. It is said to have given the warriors superhuman strength and made them impervious to pain during battle. This form of trance could have been induced partly due to ingestion of hallucinogenic mushrooms. Mystics. As the mystical experience of mystics generally entails direct connection, communication and communion with deity, Godhead or God, trance and cognate experience are endemic. As shown by Jonathan Garb, trance techniques also played a role in Lurianic Kabbalah. The mystical life of the Circle of Moshe Chaim Luzzatto and Hasidism. Christian mystics. Many Christian mystics are documented as having experiences that may be considered as cognate with trance, such as Hildegard of Bingen, John of the Cross, Meister Eckhart, Saint Teresa and Francis of Assisi. Mesmer and the origin of hypnotherapy. Mesmer, an influential but discredited promoter of trance states and their curative powers. Milton Erickson, the founder of hypnotherapy who died in 1980, introduced trance and hypnosis to orthodox medicine and psychotherapy. Hypnosis here is something different from traditional clinical hypnosis. Trance in American Christianity. Tavis charts the synonymic language of trance in the American Christian traditions. Power or presence or indwelling of God, or Christ, or the Spirit, or spirits. Typical expressions include the indwelling of the Spirit, the witness of the Spirit, the power of God, being filled with the Spirit of the Lord, communing with spirits, the Christ within, streams of holy fire and power, a religion of the Spirit and power, and the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Trance and Anglo-American Protestants. Tavis' well-referenced book on trance charts the experience of Anglo-American Protestants and those who left the Protestant movement, beginning with the transatlantic awakening in the early 18th century and ending with the rise of the psychology of religion and the birth of Pentecostalism in the early 20th century. This book focuses on a class of seemingly involuntary acts alternately explained in religious and secular terminology. These involuntary experiences include uncontrolled bodily movements, spontaneous vocalizations, unusual sensory experiences, and alterations of consciousness and/or memory. Trance, induction, and sensory modality. Trance-like states are often interpreted as religious ecstasy or visions and can be deliberately induced using a variety of techniques, including prayer, religious rituals, meditation, pranayama, physical exercise, coitus, music, dancing, sweating, fasting, thirsting, and the consumption of psychotropic drugs such as cannabis. Sensory modality is the channel or conduit for the induction of the trance. Sometimes an ecstatic experience takes place in occasion of contact with something or somebody perceived as extremely beautiful or holy. It may also happen without any known reason. The particular technique that an individual uses to induce ecstasy is usually one that is associated with that individual's particular religious and cultural traditions. As a result, an ecstatic experience is usually interpreted within the context of a particular individual's religious and cultural traditions. These interpretations often include statements about contact with supernatural or spiritual beings, about receiving new information as a revelation. Also religion-related explanations of subsequent change of values, attitudes and behavior. Benevolent, neutral and malevolent trances may be induced by different methods. Auditory. Driving through the sense of hearing by chanting, auditory storytelling, mantra, overtone singing, drumming, music, etc. Kinesthetic. Driving through the sense of feeling and movement through the kinesphere by dance, storytelling by movement, mudra, embodying rituals, yoga, breathwork, oxygen deprivation, sexual stimulation, etc. Visual. Driving through the sense of sight by yantra, visual storytelling, mandala, cinema, theater, art, architecture, beauty, strobe lights. Form constants, symmetry. Olfactory. Driving via scent through the sense of smell by perfume, pheromones, incense, flowers, pollen, indeed any scent for which we have an association or memory, etc. Gustatory. Driving through the sense of taste and indigestion, including starvation, herbs, hallucinogens and drugs. As the intake of food and beverage entails intrabodily chemical reactions through digestion, some infer that all food may be considered medicine or drugs and therefore contribute to the induction of discernible psychophysical states. Trance states can be attained through the ingestion of psychoactive drugs, particularly psychedelics, such as marijuana, LSD, peyote, psilocybin mushrooms, and MDMA. Disciplines. Yoga, Sufism, Sarat, Shabd Yoga, meditation. Miscellaneously. Traumatic accident, sleep deprivation, nitrogen narcosis, fever, by the use of a sensory deprivation tank or mind control techniques, hypnosis. meditation, prayer, naturally occurring dreams, lucid dreams, euphoria, ecstasy, psychosis, as well as purported premonitions, out-of-body experiences, and channeling. Auditory driving and auditory art. Charles Tart provides a useful working definition of auditory driving. It is the induction of trance through the sense of hearing. Auditory driving works through a process known as entrainment. The usage of repetitive rhythms to induce trance states is an ancient phenomenon. Throughout the world, shamanistic practitioners have been employing this method for millennia. Anthropologists and other researchers have documented the similarity of shamanistic auditory driving rituals among different cultures. Said simply, entrainment is the synchronization of different rhythmic cycles. Breathing and heart rate have been shown to be affected by auditory stimulus, along with brainwave activity. The ability of rhythmic sound to affect human brainwave activity, especially theta brainwaves, is the essence of auditory driving, and is the cause of the altered states of consciousness that it can induce. Visual driving and visual art. Nowak and Feltman have recently published an article entitled Eliciting the Photic Driving Response, which states that the EEG photic driving response is a sensitive neurophysiological measure which has been employed to assess chemical and drug effects, forms of epilepsy, neurological status of Alzheimer's patients, and physiological arousal. Photic driving also impacts upon the psychological climate of a person by producing increased visual imagery and decreased physiological and subjective arousal. In this research by Nowak and Feltman, all participants reported increased visual imagery during photic driving, as measured by their responses to an imagery questionnaire. Dennis Weir states that over 2 millennia ago Ptolemy and Apuleius found that differing rates of flickering lights affected states of awareness and sometimes induced epilepsy. Weir also asserts that it was discovered in the late 1920s that when light was shined on closed eyelids it resulted in an echoing production of brainwave frequencies. Weir also opined that in 1965 Gray employed a stroboscope to project rhythmic light flashes into the eyes at a rate of 10 to 25 Hz. Gray discovered that this stimulated similar brainwave activity. Research by Thomas Buczynski, E. Strander et al. In the use of brain machines suggests that photic driving via the suprachiasmatic nucleus and direct electrical stimulation and driving via other mechanisms and modalities may entrain processes of the brain facilitating rapid and enhanced learning, produce deep relaxation, euphoria, and increase in creativity, problem-solving propensity, and may be associated with enhanced concentration and accelerated learning. The theta range in the border area between alpha and theta has generated considerable research interest. Kinesthetic driving and somatic art. Charles Tart provides a useful working definition of kinesthetic driving. It is the induction of trance through the sense of touch, feeling, or emotions. Kinesthetic driving works through a process known as entrainment. The rituals practiced by some athletes in preparing for contests are dismissed as superstition, but this is a device of sports psychologists to help them to attain an ecstasy-like state. Interestingly, Joseph Campbell had a peak experience whilst running. Roger Bannister on breaking the 4-minute mile. No longer conscious of my movement, I discovered a new unity with nature. I had found a new source of power and beauty, a source I never dreamt existed. Roger Bannister later became a distinguished neurologist. Mechanisms and disciplines that include kinesthetic driving may include dancing, walking, meditation, yoga and asana, mudra, juggling, poi, etc. Sufism has theoretical and metaphoric texts regarding ecstasy as a state of connection with Allah. Sufi practice rituals use body movement and music to achieve the state.